Dear participants, welcome to the KIX EMAP Webinar 17 on whose knowledge used in education. My name is Veronica Mosolova. As many of you know, I'm the project officer for the KIX EMAP Hub. I will be the technical host for this session. And before we start the webinar, I will give you a brief technical introduction. First of all, we would like to remind you that language interpretation is available at this event in English, Arabic, and Russian. Уважаемые участники, как всегда, доступен синхронный перевод на русский язык. Вы можете выбрать предпочитаемый язык, кликнув на иконку интерпретации на нижней панели меню.
خلال الاجتماع سيكون هناك ترجمة فورية باللغة العربية.
Please note that due to the room size, all microphones will be muted. We invite you to keep the camera on if possible to create a more engaging and friendlier atmosphere at the event. Please know that this event is being recorded and the recordings will be made publicly available. And just a little reminder that we have language interpretation into English, Arabic, and Russian. We invite you to rename yourself. You can do this by going to the participants window and clicking on your name. We invite you to write your full name, your country, and the organization you represent. We also warmly invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. Please write your full name, your country, and your organization. And you can also use the chat in case of any problems. Please write to the KIX EMAP team privately. There will be several Q&A sessions at this event. Please know that you can ask your questions at any time during the meeting in the chat. You can write your first name, last name, and your country when you ask the question. And don't worry, we will not miss your question. We will group the questions together and address them during the Q&A session. So please ask your questions in the chat at any time, and you can also write your questions in Russian and Arabic. We have a group of interpreters who will help to translate your questions into English. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter at KIX EMAP. You can also use our official hashtags as KIX EMAP and GP KIX. And on that note, I would like to invite the Professor Gita Steiner-Hamsi, Professor of Comparative and International Education at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York, UNESCO Chair in Comparative Education Policy of the Geneva Graduate Institute, and the KIX EMAP Principal Researcher, who will introduce the event. Gita, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Veronica. It's a great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of two organizations that join forces. One is KIX EMAP, stands for Europe, Middle East,
and North Africa.
Yes, and Pacific region. We just recently changed the name. That's why we expanded. And NORRAG. As you may know, KIX EMAP is based at NORRAG, and NORRAG is in Geneva. KIX is a global initiative funded by GPE and administered at the global level by IDRC. Since both organizations, NORRAG and KIX, have common missions, and one of them is to produce, amplify, and disseminate knowledge of the Global South. We believe both organizations strongly in knowledge equity. We have joined forces for this wonderful event. NORRAG has been proactive, and especially Dr. Moira Fall, who is the keynote speaker in the South Also Knows initiative. And I'm sure she will talk about it very soon. And it is my really great pleasure to introduce you briefly to Moira. Moira Fall, she is the executive director of NORRAG, and NORRAG is an organization with approximately 6,000 members globally. And Moira is also senior lecturer in the Political Science and International Relations Department at the Geneva Graduate Institute. So she's a prolific scholar and then fantastic executive director. And it's really a pleasure that we have you for this event as keynote speaker. The floor is yours, Moira. And oh, maybe before we talk, we should give you an overview. And if you don't mind putting up the, so you know what the whole program is. So it's amazing, the program we put together. We brought the, prominent scholars working in this field, talking about this issue. So you will see after the presentation of Moira, we have a Q&A session. And as Veronica said before, please type your questions in the chat room. They will be grouped and then answered. And then we have a roundtable moderated by Professor Rasha Sharaf, and we have other speakers that Rasha will introduce to you. Then again, Q&A, and then a closing. The closing will be done and the Q&A by my dear colleague, José Luis Canellas, who is the director of the KIX EMAP Hub. So I think this time I haven't forgotten anything, and I give the floor again to Moira. Moira.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Geeta, and thank you to Geeta and José Luis for this invitation to speak in this KIX event. We are immensely proud of the work that is done in the KIX hub that we host in the Europe, Middle East, North Africa, Asia, and Pacific region. And we are very, very pleased to be collaborating together on this event, which, as Geeta says, goes to the very heart and the principles of what it is we do, why we do what we do, and how we do what we do. So in NORRAG, you can see there in the sort of the dark red, that surface underrepresented knowledge. That's the key principle that we're discussing today, and the ways in which that we do that at the same time as we broker policy dialogue, co-produce knowledge, and share capacity in order for our stakeholders, which is the outer part of that double donut, as we affectionately call it. Our stakeholders are then able to access what it is, the knowledge that they need. They're able to know what it is that they need to know to be able to act in an evidence-informed and principled way, because we, as NORRAG, as KIX, and also collectively with our network members, are amplifying that knowledge from the Global South. Next slide, please. So this question around knowledge equity, sometimes these can be can come across as very big words, but really fundamentally this is about making sure that we are amplifying this expertise from the Global South. We have this hashtag, the South also knows, which we find encapsulates the importance of the discussion that it is that we're having today. Next slide, please. Because the challenge, and this is a challenge that was identified in a study that we did for UNESCO, led by Professor Geeta Steiner-Kamsi, where we have these two broken feedback loops. The first one is this production of research and evidence, but then it is not used. And that is one of the feedback loops that receives quite a lot of attention, even if we can look at how it could be done better, but it does receive a lot of attention. A lot of people say, oh, we need to use evidence better when we're thinking about policy and practice. The second feedback loop, and if you could just go forward, please, Veronica, which is really this feedback loop between a large and continuously growing global supply that doesn't necessarily meet the local demand. It doesn't necessarily address the problems that are being identified by people in their own work, in their own localities, in their own countries. And if that loop is broken, it is more important, we feel, to address the bottom loop there, which is actually ensuring that local demand and local issues and local solutions to those demands and to those issues are actually being seen and understood and are informing whatever the global supply may be. Next slide, please. And so here, this is just a very quick sort of run through of what the problem is. What is the challenge? So the challenge here is, if you look at publications, we did the study for a book that's going to be out next year. And you can see in terms of just, sort of which countries are producing work, evidence around education and evidence. And you can see the usual suspects are pretty much at the top. Next slide, please. And in terms of languages, we can see again, those are the frequency of languages of production, where again, we see a deeply problematic over-representation of English. And then actually sort of going down, it's still very much sort of colonial languages that you'll see going down the top 10 as we go through. Next slide, please. And so this brought us, sort of it brings us to this question that Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak asked in 1988, which is, can the subaltern speak? And she was here in Geneva last week, and I had the pleasure to meet her. And the answer to that question that she said, next slide, please, is actually subalterns do speak and they scream by their actions. Next, please. But without responses. Next. Neither in representations. Next. Nor in dominant discourse. So subalterns are speaking, they are screaming, but they are not being heard. Next, please. So how can we hear them? Next. By actually listening to them. And that is the core of the Knowledge Equity Initiative. It's the core of The South Also Knows, which is basically to say, we know that there is expertise in the Global South. Anyone who says different is just fundamentally wrong. And what is it that we can do from our positions in the projects and the institutions that we work in to actually support those people being listened to? And The South Also Knows is one initiative for that, and also doing it in our own work as well. Next slide, please. And so The South Also Knows is built on this notion that research collaborations and any other type of collaboration between South and North are plagued by unequal relations. And that is due to historical factors that are still continuing to this day. And then in terms of specifically on research, we know that scholars from the Global South are underrepresented. We also know in terms of policy discussions that having policy discussions in the Global North about issues that affect everybody in the world, or specifically certain countries or certain regions in the Global South, in those policy dialogues, we do not see Global South expertise being represented. And then in the Global South itself, we have the situation where research that is produced locally and that is relevant contextually is actually overlooked in favor of evidence or policy documents that are produced in the Global North that may actually be and are likely to be much less relevant than they could be. Next, please. And so what is it that we have said we would like to change about this? So the first thing is looking at the seats at the table. So who is actually at the table when it comes to policy dialogues, when it comes to being represented in evidence or databases that are then used to produce policy documents or practice recommendations. And basically to say, is the Global South represented here? If this is a document that is supposed to be applied in Pakistan, are there Pakistani researchers, research, evidence, policymakers, practitioners, all of those different types of expertise, are they represented? We also go beyond representation. Next slide, please. To actually say, what are the different types of expertise that are being brought to the table? It's not just about saying we need to have somebody from Pakistan or representation of gender as well as representation of geography. It is also about saying, actually, what are those different people bringing themselves? We're not assuming that just because somebody is from Pakistan, there's only one view of something. I keep using the example of Pakistan. I could be using any of the countries. And so it's also then about saying, how do we actually think about what the expertise is that's being brought to the table? And how do we also think about bringing underrepresented expertise to the table? If the table is full of economists, how do we make sure we also bring an anthropologist, for example? If the table is only policymakers, how do we make sure we bring a practitioner to the table to be able to really inform whatever the decision making is? Next slide, please. And then also it is about remaking the tables. So it's not just about accepting that these are the tables where decisions are made and this is where we need to sit. And if we're remaking tables, then it's really about addressing the people who are there. The principles underpinning those discussions. Are the discussions being held in conditions where people can actually participate and not just be told, oh, we brought you into the room and therefore you need to be satisfied with that? What is it that needs to happen in order to make sure that that is actually done well? What are the outcomes of those discussions and how are they put into practice? Is the discussion held and then it's basically just the Global North institution extracts whatever the knowledge is and takes off with that? And also, how do we build knowledge about how the tables work in order to be able to then support others to work better in these situations and also be remaking tables themselves? Next slide, please. So I hope from that you can see some of the reasons why NORRAG and KIX work on knowledge equity. The first is justice. Next, please. Where we're really saying the reason here is that there are historic and contemporary injustices that need to be addressed. And we need to accept that this is an important enough reason on its own to be doing this work. Next, please. And then it's actually about the value of the knowledge that is being brought, because the content and the lessons are going to be more useful and more relevant. And they're going to be relevant in the South and the North. So KIX EMAP has these fantastic peer learning programs where you are working together with people from different countries who are doing the same job as you, maybe interested in the same kind of projects. So you can learn from each other South to South. And also, because we are then involved in these conversations in the global North as well, to be able to bring that expertise to the North, as opposed to always being put in the position of being recipients of knowledge from the North, actually say, here is some extremely useful knowledge from the South in order to bring that to the North also. Next, please. And then also by example. So if we do this, then it means that other people can, number one, be less comfortable saying, oh, it's too difficult, it cannot be done, because we can say, here's an example. It has been done, it can be done. And also by highlighting these experts, we bring them to a stage where then others can also see that the expertise that they bring. And I'll give you one example from late September. We held a AI and digital inequities in education summit. And in a topic like AI, where you would expect it to be very male, very white, very global north, we managed to have 2 panels. One panel was a mixed gender panel with representation from every continent that was not North America and Europe and Western Europe. And the other panel was an all-female panel, including 2 African women. So this is what we mean when we say showing by example, even in what could be considered one of the more difficult topics to be finding the right people to be bringing this expertise, we can show by example and we can work with it. Next slide, please. And the next again. And so here is an invitation to join the movement. If you can just go next again, please. We have here, you can see some of the social media chatter about the South Also Knows. By clicking on this QR code, you can register as a member. If you're already a member of the NORRAG network, all you need to do is click on the button on the first screen, which says, I am an expert from the South, and you will then join the South Also Knows movement. Next slide, please. And what is it? So first of all, it's a network for experts from the Global South. So the point is for it to be a network for you to find other people who work in the same area as you do, in the same topic, or people who work on something completely different that's really interesting and you just want to know more about it. It is also a publicly facing searchable database because we want people to be able to not have the excuse of saying it's too hard to find people who have expertise in education in Egypt. It's too hard to find people who have expertise in education in Kazakhstan, for example, or in Fiji. By having this database, we take that excuse away from them. And it's also this campaign to address the underrepresentation of Global South experts. We need to edit that. I apologize. All experts of all different types in international education policy discussions and bringing that practice voice as well. Next slide. I'm nearly done. And this is what you'll find when you go into the network. So you can see there are different individuals, the little circles. And in this particular view, it's about different regions. And you can see how they're connected to each other as well as to the regions. And then there's another view where you could see different people who are interested in, say, inclusive education or education in emergencies or teacher policy and practice. And you can then choose to connect with those people. Next slide, please. And so just a final invitation. Again, there's the QR code. You can join there. You'll also find a link to it at the bottom of, no, sorry, the top right of the NORRAG website, where it says sign up, and you can join there. Make sure that you click that box that says I am an expert from the Global South, and then you're in. And we would very much welcome all of you to join. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moira. And I think we are starting to listen to people, and we have requests now. People want already to join the network, and this has been popping in the chat. We ask the audience who want to include any questions or comments in the chat, please do so. I'll read a couple of points that were raised. We had Musnad Fahim, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, from the Government College of Education in Karachi, associate professor, was asking about here the linkage between language and the impact that languages have on knowledge equity. And the question was more focused, what about the status of Urdu at international level? So it was bringing the issue of languages in the case of Pakistan. Do you want to comment quickly on this? And then
Sure.
I have
Yeah, absolutely. So in international policy discussions, you'll usually find representation of the UN languages and sometimes plus Portuguese. And that is very much because of historical injustices. And the reasons why those hegemonic, sort of very powerful languages continue to have currency is because of colonial legacies also. So the assumption is, well, even if you speak Urdu, you'll speak English because of the colonial legacy. Even if you speak, let's say Hmong, you will speak French because of colonial legacies. So this is something that is absolutely critical and it's not taken seriously enough. And I think one of the things that GPE, that the KIX program has taught us is also the importance of making sure that we have interpretation available for accessibility reasons, and also making sure that we are doing everything possible in terms of languages. Now, thank you very much to the interpreters for being here today. We have to be honest, it is expensive. And we have principles and therefore we live up to our principles and we put our money where our mouth is. But it does mean that it can't necessarily be all of the languages that we would like to have. And that this is one of the things that I absolutely believe we need to be looking for a more systemic solution to, where it is actually assumed that this should be the case. And therefore you can actually have, in the same way that, KIX EMAP Hub went to the funders and said, we need to be able to provide more languages to our participants in order for them to be able to participate in the way that we would like them to. And that was listened to with respect, and it was taken through and followed through in action. And that's simply not the case with all funders and all funded projects. So how do we also bring about that systems change, that systems leadership to move that question on languages forward?
Exactly, and this is a continuous challenge we have. We just had one question just out of the oven, which is from Taimur Arbab. Taimur Arbab is an associate professor. He's from Cedar College also in Pakistan. Taimur had asked a question before, can the Global South create collaborative networks among member countries so that they can create networks of cooperation in research? This was answered from Marishi, from our side, from our team, saying that the NORRAG network is one example of such a collaborative network. And Taimur then added a next question, which is, with countries like Pakistan, in countries like Pakistan, knowledge is far off commodity. Material deprivation impacts the daily life of an individual. Can knowledge acquisition be separated from material paucity in the Global South? This is a question that you believe is a single webinar, but if you can address it in
absolutely. So I think, so the first thing that I would say is you're absolutely correct that, the material reality in which we live limits possibilities and potentials in so many ways, physically, emotionally, intellectually, all of these things, and particularly in terms of being able to access knowledge, to be able to become a producer of knowledge that is then taken seriously. And that's the important thing here in this particular discussion, the types of knowledge that are then allowed to be taken seriously in these discussions, whether it's national policy or global policy. I think what we can't lose sight of at the same time is the very knowledge about that material deprivation and the effects of that material deprivation and the ways in which that material deprivation disallows people to participate meaningfully in their own lives, in policies that will make a difference in their own lives and in practices as well. And so at the same time as I absolutely take your point that those material conditions do constrain and we need to be addressing them, we also need the knowledge of those people, from those people, as to the realities of their lives and the constraints that they suffer in order to be able to make the changes that need to be made.
Thank you so much, Maura. There's the ongoing discussion in the chats. We will proceed now to the roundtable discussion. There will be other moments for Q&A. So we invite you to continue to include your comments, your questions, and we will raise it later in the event. And I'll hand over to Rasha Sharaf, who is our knowledge lead, part of our KIX EMAP team, for her to lead us into the roundtable. Please, Rasha.
Thank you, José Luis. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Moira, for a very inspiring presentation. And that opens the door now for the roundtable discussion that would capitalize on the information provided in your presentation through real-life experiences. So we would know now from experts in the South what is impossible and what can be done through the roundtable discussion, as well as their life experience. I would like first to introduce our wonderful roundtable speakers. I would start with Sarfaroz Niyozov. He is the Acting Associate Dean for Academic Programs at Ontario Institute of Studies for Studies in Education, OISE. From the University of Toronto, Canada, and he's also an associate professor within the departments of curriculum studies and teacher development and comparative and international education. His research focuses on education in Tajikistan because he's originally from Tajikistan, and the broader Central Asia region, especially in terms of teacher training and perspectives. We would also have Radhika Gurur. She is associate professor in the School of Education in Deakin University. Her research is in the fields of education and education policy, the sociology of quantification and metrics, and critical data studies. She is interested in the social and political lives of data and in how policies get mobilized, stabilized, circulated, and challenged. Her research spans education policy and reform, global aid, and other many interesting things. She is the founding director of the Laboratory of International Assessment Studies, convener of the Deakin Science and Society Network, and founding member of the International Studies Network. She's the editor of the journal Discourse, Studies in the Cultural Politics of Education. We also have our dear Sajid Ali, who is before introducing him, he is the interim national coordinator of KIX EMAP in Pakistan, and he is a Amir Sultan Shinoy endowed associate professor and former dean of the Aga Khan University's Institute of Educational Development in Pakistan. He holds a PhD in Education Policy Studies from the University of Edinburgh and a Master's of Education in Leadership and Policy from Monash University and a Master in Sociology from the University of Karachi. He is the recipient of various awards. I bet he has a table full of, trophies and awards, and he has also taught at Hamdard University in Karachi. He is the General Secretary of Pakistan Association for Research in Education, PAIR. His research interests include globalization and education policy, new forms of educational governance, policy networks, and more. Last but not least, we have Chankolika BO. She is representing the governments on the table of today, and she is the director of the Policy Department, Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports of Cambodia. She earned her PhD in education from Flinders University in Australia. In her role as director, she leads and manages educational research projects and turns research results into informed education policies, which is very relevant to also our roundtable discussion today. She has successfully led the formulation process of the key education policies for improving education quality in Cambodia. And she's actively involved in the process of transforming Cambodia's education system. Currently, she's leading the development process of a digital education strategy for schools to build Cambodia's next generation technology enhanced learning ecosystem. I would like to welcome them all for the roundtable discussion. And we would start now. We have all in all 35 minutes, so we want to be very wise using the time. We'll start with the first question. The first question for the panelists today is, why is knowledge equity important? And how does knowledge equity contribute to the education equity? I would start with Sarfaroz. Please, Sarfaroz, give us an input about that. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for introducing me. Just one small correction. I was acting interim associate dean at OISE, but I'm just an associate professor right now.
Okay.
So yeah, just briefly, go to your question. Thank you so much for being speaking at this absolutely distinguished forum, and thanks Moira for setting the stage. So I just want to build on what you say, is that why knowledge equity is important is a question of two sides. One is the value, the meaning, the type, and the access to knowledge. Knowledge has always been an important and expensive commodity and status related, not just in the West, but even in the non-Western context. And we have lots of examples from, let's say, Central Asia, South Asia, where those who have knowledge have been always put higher than those who have not had it. So the question, however, becomes also what kind of knowledge, whose knowledge, and who accesses that knowledge. The more important thing is that knowledge has become more critically important as we moved on across the century, because we currently live in what we call knowledge society or knowledge economy, where knowledge is a prime commodity, where access to knowledge, also the kind of knowledge that is provided, is critical for progress, for development, for quality of life, for success at individual, national, community, in all kind of levels, for dignity ultimately. So how is it related to education? It is related to education in the sense that education represents an institution where this knowledge is filtered, and this knowledge is decided, whose knowledge, what kind of knowledge, to what amount, whose perspective should be there for people to get that knowledge. And as such, schools have for long been places of reproduction of inequities and inequalities because of particular form of knowledge given to people. And also it depends on what kind of school. As we now speak today, the proliferation of privatization, the proliferation of different types of school has also channeled different types of school to be available to different type of people. And as such, we are creating inequities across language, it was just spoken, but also across class, across gender, across rural and urban, across ethnic, and across many other dimensions in societies by who has access to the knowledge and not. The last thing, of course, is what, just building on what Moira said, is that the question of epistemic justice, which is that so far, the knowledge, at least for the last 200, 150 years, the knowledge that has been largely in schools has been Eurocentric and Euromodernist knowledge, marginalizing the local, other perspectives about which we will talk later. But the bottom line is that there is no justice without equity in knowledge, and there is no global justice without epistemic justice.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You're very good at time management. Thank you very much, Faraz. And now we move on to Radhika. How can you add to that, Radhika, please?
Actually, this is such a big subject, and I'm so glad that Sarfraz actually kind of put the bulk of it on the table. That leaves me a much easier job. And what I thought I'd like to do is to actually begin with an analogy and say that, you know, when we watch rainforests being destroyed, you know, by the thousands of hectares, and we worry about how many species are eliminated in that process, they become extinct, and those species of plants and animals might hold the key to you know, curing cancer or other deadly diseases, and so the loss of this kind of biodiversity and the loss of just the forest is, you know, it's a huge loss. It's a loss that is that hits the world very hard. And in a way, you can think of the loss of indigenous and vernacular knowledges in the same way, that there's a kind of the destruction and suppression and marginalization of these of certain ways of knowing means that actually we're losing access to you know, pearls that might have saved, that might kind of get us out of the hole that we seem to have dug ourselves in and we don't know how to get out of. So in a way, I want to change the debate and not see this knowledge equity as an issue of simply kind of looking at it from the perspective of, you know, the like indigenous communities, First Nations peoples, or marginalized communities and so on, or the global south. I actually feel it's a loss to the world. So it's almost the other way around, that, you know, it's really a very pragmatic reason. It's not just for kind of, you know, in support of the global south. It's really a very pragmatic imperative that we recover other ways of knowing, because I think what's happened now is that these kind of relentless kind of hegemony of Western or Eurocentric ways of knowing has boxed us in. Our imaginaries are completely locked in. We're not able to get out of it. And even when we know that things are, we know, for example, what's happening with the climate. We know that the insect population has come down drastically, and that's going to have a terrible effect on us very soon. But we don't seem to be able to stop ourselves. And I feel that we've just lost that capacity to be innovative, to think, you know, in other ways. And I think for that reason, if nothing else, we really need to, you know, kind of knowledge equity is really, really important. So we need those knowledges now. It's a matter of our survival. The other part of the question was, does knowledge equity contribute to education equity? Well, here I'll shift a little bit and talk about the current paradigm that governs education, that comes, you know, like through the SDGs and so on, from a certain global trust in numbers and accountability, and lately techno-solutionism. So the problem of education and the solutions to these problems are all defined in these terms that are fairly standard, and they're equal across the world. So in a way that's a gesture towards equity. And in a way, some of it has actually worked, because enrollment into schools has gone up, maybe gender parity has improved, and there's a higher, you know, kind of completion of school. And those are all important things. I don't want to dismiss any of the value of any of that. But I think there are also other inequities, many of which Moira very eloquently pointed out in her opening keynote. So, so there is that. So lately, some of the work I've been doing with some colleagues has looked at how through the process of sustainable development goals, through the UIS processes of, you know, getting standardized thematic indicators and so on, how kind of views are, there's a kind of an exercise in gathering different viewpoints to generate a kind of a global view from everywhere. But what we're arguing is that those views are not actually views from everywhere, because there is no kind of polity that you know, that supports that it's actually views from elsewhere. So it's really still alien knowledge that is coming through there. And I think that's one of the things that need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radhika, and I like the analogy very much. It's very relevant. Let's move up to Kulika and ask Kulika, from a government point of view, do you really think that knowledge equity would contribute to education equity?
Thank you for inviting me to this panel, and I really appreciate for the invitation. So to me, the two professors already give a very beautiful answer to why knowledge equity important, and I think everyone here agree that equity, knowledge equity important. But just would like to highlight some of the idea from Cambodia, because we are I can say represent the global south in this panel. So basically, knowledge equity for Cambodia is to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, socioeconomic status, geographical location, has equal access to the quality of education. It is important, what we really want, and this also really mentioned in highlighted in our education policy, is to try to provide equality access to the quality of education and provide lifelong learning for our students. So but Cambodia, you know, we are facing like the limited financial technical resources, inadequate infrastructures, poverty. This also contribute to the educational disparity. So we need to really promote knowledge equity in order to address this issue. I just would like to highlight some of the key area where knowledge equity is important. One is about on the research and evidence-based policy making. Actually, in Cambodia now we gradually promote this research and evidence-based policy making. Like my department, we do a lot of research before we turn it into the policy. So because the research also can help us to understand the underlying causes and also can inform the policy making. Like recently, Cambodia, my department, we are developing, we are carrying out the research on learning ability gap between male and female students at the upper secondary school. We try to understand what are the causes underlying the low performance of the boy student, and this will help us to really identify the strategy and the intervention to improve the learning outcome of the male student. Secondly, it's about we use the inclusive education policy. We have the inclusive education policy. So by reflect on the diverse learner background, culture, experience, we can help them to get to equal access to the quality of education. And the knowledge equity also can happen at the financial sphere. So I would like you to see knowledge equity is not, because we can generate a lot of knowledge from different sources. So it's, and also different setting. It's just not from the research. So from the financial setting, we also need to think about equitable resource allocation to the school, for example, disadvantaged school. That is why in Cambodia now we are identify the disadvantaged school. We try to create the criteria for the disadvantaged school so that we can provide the intervention, the resources to those disadvantaged schools, rather than just to give all like the fund to the school equally. So here is some of the importance of the knowledge equity in order to improve the quality of education in Cambodia.
Thank you very much, Kalika. I could see the relevant example from the Cambodian education system and how really knowledge equity might lead to and contribute to the education equity. We'd move on to the second question, given the rich input that you've already given on the first question. And the second question is about what knowledge inequities exist in subregions and in national contexts from both research and policy or practice perspectives. And I would start here with Sajid, because I mean, I've just read your article on the UNESCO GEM blog, and that, you know, it's about girls in the rural areas of Sindh, and it's very relevant. Please, Sajid.
Thank you very much. So I would like to, I think it has always been in all the discussion that Moira, Sarfroz, Radhika, and even Geeta shared, the relationship of knowledge and with power. And so when you ask me the question about what knowledge inequities exist, we have to move to the question of power. And in preparation for my understanding, I was reading, for example, Michael Apple's idea of official knowledge, and then we can expand it to the global official knowledge, and that has its effect on the local knowledge, and that causes knowledge inequities. So what I also did was I looked at, for example, these education sector plans in different provinces of Pakistan. And so what I noticed was that in the acknowledgement sections in all the 4 provinces, there has been substantial recognition of institutions like World Bank, UNESCO, GPE, the UNICEF, USAID, JICA. So in all the 4 provinces, education sector plans in Pakistan that I looked at, it seems that 2 of the provinces' sector plans were developed with the financial support of the grant that they received from GPE. That grant made, for example, the expertise of the UNESCO or the UNICEF be made available for the provincial government. So, and that's why, for example, and I personally participated in some of the consultations in that lead up to the development of education sector plans. Now, what happens in the plans development? There are invariably a group called consultants. And these consultants are kind of a conduit that, or sometimes bargain between global and local knowledges. Sometimes their function is to enforce global into local, but sometimes some conscious consultants also become kind of broker between the global and the local. So the knowledge inequities are related to power, and the power imbalance depends on at least three things that I have noticed. One is the capacity gap that the national government have. So over the years, with the growth of consultants, with the growth of international agencies, the national governments and the bureaucrats and the experts within the Ministry of Education, they're what Bob Jessup has called hollowed out. The capacity to deal with issues, their capacity to even comprehend, articulate the problem, and those things have actually been blunted. The second gap is the financial gap. I think my colleagues have highlighted that it's an expensive business. Knowledge comes with an expensive business, carrying out research, carrying out all those kinds of things. And national governments have very little financial space. Education has further little financial spaces. And then that financial spaces is then allocated for some other urgent issues. For example, in Pakistan, floods have washed out many schools. So that those financial resources are diverted to them rather than allocated to knowledge. The last but the most important thing is the control of the discourse. So the knowledge inequity takes place because of the discourse that is set by the development agencies. For example, what knowledge is sanctioned. So the knowledge has to be peer reviewed. It has to appear in the journals, the Google, the AI, and all those kinds of things create an aura around which knowledge. So what is knowledge gets defined by what gets accepted in at all these forums. So that cause different knowledge imbalances. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajid, very much. And let's move on to Kolika about examples of inequities that exist.
Thank you. So I would like to highlight the three knowledge inequity in Cambodia. First, it's about the influence of neoliberal ideology or practices. And this is very similar to what happened in Pakistan. Because as you know, Cambodia, after the civil war in 1990, we start to receive the aid from the development partner. We come to Cambodia to help us. So usually they bring their consultant to help us. That is why we can see some of the dominant discourse in Cambodia, like accountability, like performance-based, like assessment. So this is all the, and also like gender. So this is all the global dominant discourse that influenced by the neoliberal ideology and practices. And recently, the World Bank is one of, it's called the dominant idea organization because they provide us the fund. We receive they give us the loan, and then they help with the education reform. So they propose like recently it's called school-based management. But you know, school-based management is something which is not really practical in Cambodia, but because they provide the money, so we have to accept this as one of the our policy agenda. So so this really make us to revisit. So whose education are for? So for the development partner, for the World Bank, or what? And also, like in terms of research, usually the research only focus on policy implementation, the impact of the policy implementation, but not really on the critical examination of the goal of education, the purpose of education. So this is something that we really need to revisit the approach of doing the research in Cambodia as well. A second inequity is about the language and cultural barrier. this also could really exacerbate the knowledge inequity in Cambodia. So basically, as you can see, and in the first presentation, it's about the research always about English. I mean, from like the US, from the Canada, but not really from the global South. And this really for Cambodia, like the researcher and policymakers, it's hard for them to access and to understand the really understand the research which is written in English and not in our own language. And also like the researcher in Cambodia, they also write the research in English, not in our language, because it's easy to write in English than in Cambodian language in terms of the concept, the framework. If we translate into Cambodian language, it's also hard. So that is why even a Cambodian researcher, scholar, they also publish article in English. And another thing, like if Cambodian researcher, they write the article, no one are not going to quote or cite, but the same article, but writing by the Western scholar, they will cite. Because I also write the article, and because I am Cambodian, so even Cambodian scholar not also cite, do not also cite my article. So I think this is something that we need to really address this issue, and also we need to consider about the cultural different context specific factors, and usually they are not really considered in research and also in policy formulation or implementation. That is why in this mandate, when the minister came, he started to mobilize the local researcher to come and help us, and then that is why now we are not implement the SBM anymore, because we think it is the global agenda. So we try to make something which is more local, and we call like model school. So this is really something that we try to learn from the SBM global agenda, but come to our local context, because we are now starting to have the local researcher, local education specialists. So now we can develop the policy by themselves. But before, even like the education strategic plan, some of the key policy are developed by the consultant, by the Western consultant. And the last point is about the resource, the funding for the research. So in Cambodia, the fund for the research is very low in comparing to even the neighboring country in ASEAN. So this is that is why, Cambodia researcher, they don't want to do the research because the funding is very limited. And even like my department, even we do the research, but the fee for the researcher is very low. But because we love the research and we would like to really empower the local researcher, we would like to promote the culture in Cambodia. That is why my department do the research, but without any fee. It's just like a normal work, like other doing thing, not a thinker. So I would like to share some of the experience here, but the situation is a little bit better, and our leaders start to emphasize the importance of the research, and that is why, like my department, we always call it think tank from for the ministry, and we will try to upgrade ourselves to become more and more knowledgeable in this area.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kulika, and you've raised a very important issue, which is the bias, the local bias towards knowledge. I mean, if really policymakers believe that their local knowledge is really relevant and quality and usable or not. I would move on now to to Sarfaraz to reflect on the same question. Please, Sarfaraz.
Thank you so much. So just to build on what has been said, there are a number of dimensional aspects to the question of what kind of inequities or knowledge inequities exist. One of them is, I could say that knowledge inequities exist regarding the current scientific rationality, Eurocentrist knowledge aspect. And what this includes is who gets access to that knowledge? Who it is given to? At global level, like the West would give it more to those and at cheaper price, perhaps to those that they like, and maybe at much cheaper price to those that they don't think are their allies. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that within the local place, we have, for example, different types of schooling. I mean, I lived in Pakistan, worked there, currently in Central Asia, especially despite the tries and attempts by local stakeholders. There is now differentiation of different types of schools: private schools, elite schools, non-private schools, urban schools, rural schools, and this distribution of knowledge is uneven among them. And therefore, all this creates what I said earlier, number of issues around questions of equity in terms of access, in terms of quality inequity, access inequity, types of knowledge inequity, and so on. The other dimension, as I mentioned earlier, is the question of epistemic inequity that has been already spoken here about. That what we have is, interestingly, on the one hand, we have Eurocentrist knowledge of that we currently teach and we currently replicate all over the world. On the other hand, in reaction to these, particularly in the post-colonial dimensions or post-colonial reactions, there is a rise of ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism sometimes, and we have global, I'm speaking globally now, we have examples of when ethnocentrist ideas and knowledge themselves become exclusive and themselves becomes problematic, and therefore would create another level of what I would call inequities. And that's why I would perhaps ask all of us to look at the Sousa Santos's idea of ecology of knowledges, where you bring every knowledge, including Eurocentrist, ethnocentrist, other type of perspectives into the same table that Moira just mentioned earlier in her, and then have a free space to talk about this and have criteria for judging them, because knowledge is human construct and it is not neutral. So the last thing I want to say here is, I will speak about that later, but last thing I want to say is that some of the questions are related to internet access and to all these online social media and so on, that lots of knowledge and education, formal or informal, has been done through these channels. However, once again, because of the price, because of the global geopolitical and economic structure, the access to internet and access to social media and access to all these sources of knowledge, including journal articles and so on, has been really controlled, creating another level of inequities.
That would take us to solutions and strategies. What solutions and strategies you might propose for that?
Well, this is third question. Should we go into that? You starting with me?
Yes, so as you can finish in one go because of time.
Okay, thank you. So speaking about this, now I can speak a little bit about my experiences in Central Asia, that we need to do a number of things. One of them, of course, is awareness raising. There is a lot of, I would say, misunderstandings, lots of curiosity about what is this all about. So we need to make people aware, again, as I said, that knowledge is related to power, knowledge is related to inequity, knowledge is related to domination and exclusion and so on. And therefore, this simplistic idea about knowledge being always good things and always something that would lead us to happiness needs to be itself engaged. And more particularly in this epistemic sense of whose knowledge are we talking about and why are we, so that's the first thing. And so we do it through our publications. I mean, I do it through my publications, number of presentations that I have done and so on. The second thing is what Sajid said about capacity development. We need to develop capacities at individual, institutional, and national level. And I've been very lucky to work with the government of Tajikistan, with institutions there, with private institutions, public institutions, such as, for example, Kazakh Women National University, or Tajik State Universities, or Ministry of Education, and Khorog State University, University of Central Asia, to work to offer workshops and trainings on not only research method and knowledge production method and improving pedagogies method, but also at the same time simultaneously questioning and engaging the possible biases, Eurocentrist biases, and seeking always the local people's input into them. So the third thing I want to say is that, as I spoke already, improving the pedagogy.
Yeah, Sarfaros, thank you very much. That was really very helpful. And we
Okay,
move now to Radhika, please. Quick messages about the solutions and strategies from your own point of view.
There we go. Sorry, I was waiting to be unmuted. Thank you very much. And again, Sarfaros has so eloquently actually put a lot on the table, which I found myself nodding all the time because that's exactly, I agree with him so much. And I agree also that knowledge is never static, right? And it doesn't actually belong to anyone. It belongs to groups that kind of legitimize, or the kind of what is known as epistemic kind of communities that legitimize civic epistemologies, which are where you need publics to accept that certain things are knowledge. So it's not static. It doesn't belong to anyone. It's a shared resource. And the minute you stop sharing it, of course, it shrivels up and dies because it has to keep circulating. So in a way, thinking about whose knowledge, that's a bit of a red herring, I feel. And instead, if we focused on sourcing innovative ways to think about, think ourselves out of the crises that are facing us, and how do we bring more people into the mix? How do we bring more ideas into the mix? And how do we get away from some of the old boundaries? And I've used the word firewalls because, of course, a lot of this is actually also excluding people from accessing knowledge, which is also part of what is happening today. So I also think we need to be very, very careful in imputing what it is that the Global South wants or needs, and to imagine that somehow that kind of a pre-colonial time was historically a golden period and there was no inequities at that time, and so on and so forth. And I think we need to think about the aspirations and the fact that within the Global South, there are huge inequities, and the people with access to Western knowledges actually have better access to power and resources in the Global South. And so to kind of, I think we need, especially when we're trying to go in there with a good intention of trying to do something, we need to be really careful about what it is that we're trying to, what we think is a good state to achieve. For this, I think we need new conceptual frameworks. I simply think that we're still stuck in old ways of thinking, and I don't think we have proper frameworks to understand how do we conceptualize, the current aspirations in the Global South. I think Mbembe, for example, talks about hybridity and the kind of post-colonial vibrancy and energy in Africa, for example. And he sees that this is coming from, the current kind of hope and new ideas and creativity, which intermingles with the kind of, the colonial past. So it's not like a break from or something like that. And then I also think that actually AI, I mean, this is very strange for me to be speaking this because I spent a lifetime, just critiquing data. But I think actually big data and AI might actually hold some, or technologies, and data technologies might hold some possibilities. And I want to point to, I don't know too much about this yet, but I've just been reading lately about India's digital public infrastructure, which kind of imagines, digital resources as being more publicly accessible and belonging to the public. And they also have started something called NDR, National Digital Education Architecture, which, from what I understand, provides opportunities for different, people from different sectors to gather and collaborate and, assemble in that space to do interesting work. Now, I don't know whether, again, whether the intent is met with actual action or whether these are actually, pipe dreams, we don't know, but these are probably some places where we might think about. Finally, I want to talk about the work of Hartmut Rosa, who's a German philosopher, and he talks about this notion of resonance, the ability for us to speak and to be heard, to listen and to hear, and engage with each other. And he says that, like in trying to create kind of to bring ideas together, like in TV, for example, people bring opposing views in debate with each other. And he says that's the worst thing you could possibly do because nobody wants to listen. Everybody just wants to shout at each other. So what he talks about is if you have a problem, and you get groups together to build a solution, not something that's already thought about, but to actually create a solution, it creates a much better opportunity for kind of new knowledge to be produced and mutual exchange of ideas and so on. And I think we need some of those kinds of structures really to think about, how do we kind of create some possibilities for a fair and equitable kind of knowledge exchange or innovation and learning.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And I guess this brings us to the Q&A slot, and where you can add more in within your answers to the questions about more relevant information to the question that we're having. I would hand it over to Jose Luis. Please, Jose, did we have any questions that we need to talk about?
Yes, Russian, we have so many, which the difficulty is trying to filter this into common themes. So let me try to see here, we pick up here 3 different questions that go around the role of the global north and the critique that some of our audience are making to it. David Frost from ArtScam Network, he mentioned that we need to critique the dominant modes of knowledge production, which are tightly policed by the academic apparatus in the north or in the west. And this is often undermining the confidence of those who have not been educated or socialized within this university system. People are excluded because they may not know how to play the academic game. This is something that has been a discussion about this academic game. And Nama Amaboa from Ghana also mentions a connecting point, that there is often a superiority of training from the global north institutions comparison to the global south. And Julio Cardoso from Brazil points out on this overall critique of the global north institutions and ways of working, the amounts of funding that are coming from the global north and to the global north. And are institutions in the global north really willing to face changes in power relations and walk the talk? So this is the first question that we could start to have a discussion. And then we look at the second topic, which is more about the marginalization of certain ways of knowledge. I don't know if some of the speakers would like to react, quick reaction to this.
Sajid, would you like to go first?
In a way, that's a question for the global north. I'm placed at a very different trajectory, but I guess I can share with you the example of teaching license policy in Pakistan that we have just recently developed, and I've just shared the link where people can access more about it. So what we need is a dialogue between the scholars in the north and the scholars in the south. And if you follow the link, that's maybe one of the ways where knowledge equities can be created. So I think what we need to do is to have the seat on the table, as Moira suggested, and we have to partner with it. And I think in the example that I shared is an example where, for example, we partnered with the scholars from the north. And as Radhika was saying, quoting the German philosopher, the problem solver. So I think the scholars in the south have to be problem solver. And I'm sure if they articulate and if they connect with the people in the north, the scholarly community in the north is very willing to contribute. And we don't have to forget, for example, people like Sarfroz, people like Radhika, people like Geeta, people are like many who are in this forum are actually working in the north, but initially from the south. So the north is not as homogeneous as we believe it to be. And so those critical dialogue would be very useful. And I think I have this idea, so we can learn to play the academic game, but that game has to be played based on the kind of problems that need solution. And so I shared some example here. I also share one of the papers that I've recently written. So if people would like to follow further, they can just see that as well.
Thank you so much, Sajid. I think Kolika as well, can you respond to the question from your own point of view as a government representative?
So thank you. So I think we need to change the discourse of development. Right now, as I mentioned, just like one World Bank, but other development partner also, they try to shape our education policy. And sometimes because we also need to look at the capacity of the people in the global south. I mean, because sometimes they cannot, what I can say, they cannot bring the local epistemology or local knowledge to education policy. But actually, like in the local knowledge is, like, for example, I raised about the gender discourse. Actually, because in Cambodia, we have our Chbap Srei. Chbap Srei is just like the code of conduct for women. And actually, there are a lot of good knowledge from that Chbap Srei, but because when the donor, they try to bring the Western discourse into Cambodia, so that is why, you know, our discourse is not the same as our local discourse, and usually we the impact from this is that we still cannot address the gender disparity or gender issue in Cambodia. So I think we should need to revisit the discourse in this case and try to bring back our local knowledge into our education policy. So this is something that I would like to share.
Thank you, Kolika. And maybe Sajid, Jose Luis, do you have any more questions on the table?
Actually, there are two themes that we would like to discuss, but the second one is more around the marginalization of certain ways of knowing, as Radik has pointed out in our first intervention. We have Nada Kanza from Lebanon mentioning the example of knowledge that is imported to the countries through academic books, through secondary education and basic education books that are produced in the global north, and the texts in those books relate to Western cultures and specific ways of thinking. Claudia Pozo from Bolivia mentions about the difficulty of bringing in oral knowledge and traditional knowledge into academia and to other spaces where knowledge is institutionalized. This is a challenge we have. And how do we overcome this? And I think we have two ways of thinking this of as a disruption that needs to exist. For sure, there is a dichotomy here, but there is also a win-win situation, as I will quote here Radhika when she was saying at the beginning, it's a loss to the world. There's a lot of there's a lot of south in the north and a lot of north in the south as well. So how can we make this a compelling case so that knowledge that is available can be further institutionalized and can be entered the academic, the policy game? So let's think about solutions, how to bring consensus within this very disruptive context. Any reactions?
So Radhika, would you like to go here?
It's always interesting, isn't it, to, I think one thing that has happened, of course, is again, with technology, as much as, you know, as much as I know that they include biases and that there are injustices built into these machines, I still feel actually that there may be big possibilities for example, just translation. You know, translations become so much easier now with with the generative AI kind of technologies now. And so this idea that that you can't take school textbooks, for example, making accessible high quality materials, because there are in fact high quality materials available in the global north. There's no getting away from that. But to make that accessible in a language that is also accessible, or to reframe them in contexts that are meaningful, etc., must be much easier and less expensive now than it was before. I remember when I was a child, or even much later, actually, one of the things that used to happen was people used to ship textbooks to the global south as donations. Now we don't need to do that anymore, because of course the digital is so much kind of so pervasive now. I do admit, of course, that it's not available to everybody. Everybody does not have access to digital resources, and so that inequity will probably continue to exist, even though it might get reduced. I was thinking about things like, at the global level, I think it's called the Global Coalition for Education, or the Global Education Coalition. I think it's called the Global Education Coalition, which is UNESCO with more than 200 companies, which include Facebook and Microsoft and Huawei and all sorts of companies, which are actually leading reform in education reform in the world. I find that quite extraordinary. I don't know, with that kind of global force, how can we possibly fight for more equitable kind of knowledges, and how will we not be washed away with such a global force? I really, that astonishes me. They have come up with a subset called the Digital Transformation Collaboration, and they want to invite nations in the global south to go completely digital, and they're going to provide innovative finance and innovative kind of structures and management kind of resources to help that happen. So I think some of those are really quite concerning when we think about it. I don't know whether maybe they'll have, we'll be able to use their resources to do other things, I don't know, but I think I don't think it's that easy.
Thank you. I think Sarfaraz has something. All right.
Maybe let me just add this last question, and then Sarfaraz, I think it would be good to hear from Sarfaraz, because Geeta Stanakamsi, so she was including a question before that links quite well with what Radik was saying, was asking about if artificial intelligence is both a solution and a problem. Is artificial intelligence an accelerator of knowledge inequity, as it is reproducing what is already posted on the web, which is mostly knowledge from the global north? Or is it helping reducing knowledge inequity, as it is becoming more easy, as Radik was saying, to translate certain texts and to have access to more knowledge? So some reactions on this. Maybe we could start with Sarfaraz first.
Well, thank you so much, Jose. So let me just quickly respond to the previous question about this whole issue of what do we do about these local perspectives and so on. I think I agree that there are lots of sources, and there are lots of work that is going around the world. And what is needed is a very important open discussion. And therefore, the context is critically important for international consultants to understand the context of local, and for the local to understand the other one, and have a critical open discussion with using different criteria, not necessarily the academic rigor, but other criteria for judging on what kind of education should be on the place. So that's one. With regard to artificial intelligence, I think it's a new question for all of us, artificial intelligence, but one could look at it two ways. One could look at it, another tool for let's say, Eurocentric West to promote its own dominance, etc. But one could look at it as a social construct that could be used by people to their own benefits, and made and reshaped their own, to promote their own perspectives, to promote their own knowledge, to promote their solution, and so on. So the question, of course, with artificial intelligence and so on, becomes also a major questions of ethics and major question of integrity and so on. But I would say that it's a two-pronged, like anything else in education and in society, is a social construct, and therefore it is a two-pronged tool or idea that could be used for the different purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarfaraz. I mean, the topic is very inspiring for everyone, and the questions keep coming. But I think we would now conclude with a closing remark from Moira Fall and Jose Luis Canales. Moira, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for that, the very, very rich discussion there between the panelists, and also with all of those fantastic questions in the chat. And thank you, Rasha, for some fantastic moderating there. And just to say that NORRAG, as I said, is incredibly proud to be hosting this KIX EAP initiative. We also have other work that you may be interested in that you can find on our website. Again, very much warmly inviting you to sign up to the South Also Knows website. And just to let you know that we have a side event at the same time as the Global Refugee Forum next week, but it will be online as well as inside the forum itself. And Veronica's just very kindly added the link there to register. It's the launch of a policy insights publication on refugee teachers. So it's really getting to the heart of this question of teachers and the importance of teachers in achieving any kind of educational outcomes. And we'll be very pleased to see you at that event and at any other event. And thank you all so much. José Luis.
Yes, thank you, Moira. And before we close, a couple of points here. First, to thank you, NORRAG, the South Also Knows initiative, for partnering with us on this event. Then thank you so much for the roundtable speakers, Kulika, Radhika, Sajid, Safaros, for sharing with us your knowledge with such passion on this topic. We know how busy you are and the different time zones that you are joining this event from. So we are very grateful. And I think our audience has shown as well that they were very grateful for your contributions. Thank you to all the team of interpreters and all the team from KIX EAP and NORRAG that made this event possible. And also thank you to GP and IDRC, who is supporting the KIX EMAP work. So we often talk about improving equity in our education systems of our GP partner countries. And as we saw today, one step to put us more close to having equity in our education systems is also to have equity in the knowledge that is being used to design, implement, and influence education policies, education practices. Our hub will continue its mission to surfacing, amplifying, and using research evidence for policy planning in the EMAP region. We have a next stop already next week, December 13 at 12 p.m. Geneva. We'll have the second edition of our workshop focusing on grant writing for applied research projects. It will be a 2-hour interactive workshop that will be led by our team to build up the knowledge, build up the skills, and share experiences on how to write successful applications for applied research. We remind you as well that GP KIX has 2 open calls for applied research projects on teaching and early learning. The deadline for application is now on the 15th of January. All the details on the event I mentioned and also on this open call for KIX research is being shared in the chats. We also want to hear your opinion about our webinar today, what worked well and what we can do better. So please fill out the survey with the link that is shared in the chat as well. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you all soon, and our journey is just starting. Thank you.